Once there were 11 salmon rivers in Estonia. Every year, over 200,000 wild juvenile salmon migrated to the sea from the rivers. Salmon are particular about water. They like rivers with clear water that are rich in oxygen and have some fast-flowing sections. In order to spawn successfully, female salmon need river bottoms with gravel beds. All these conditions were present in Estonian rivers in the 20s and 30s. Salmon was the catch that coast dwellers prized most highly and was their most important source of income. Up to 140 tons of salmon and sea trout were caught annually. Even then, the fishermen were aware that catching spawning fish reduced the size of future catches. To increase the stock of salmon, sea trout, and whitefish, hatcheries were built on the rivers, using eggs taken from fish returning to their home rivers to spawn. The fry were released in suitable bodies of water. Because of human impact, the number of these fish has decreased dangerously, and many populations have perished. Building of dams on the salmon rivers turned out to be a catastrophe. After the construction of the Narva hydroelectric power station, the original wild salmon population of the Narva River perished. Because of pollution, reproduction in the wild decreased to 2,000 to 4,000 smolts per year. The areas where salmon live and spawn were destroyed. Catches decreased in all of the countries of the Baltic region. Overfishing was a problem. In the 70s, limits were imposed on the open sea fishing of salmon. The country's fishing quota depended on restocking of the salmon population. In 1994, the Põllula Fish Rearing Center was founded. Its main purpose is to restock salmon populations in the one-time salmon rivers. The first experimental release of juvenile salmon into the river took place in 1997. Now the fish have been living in the sea for 2 years, and during their third autumn, they will return to their home river to spawn. This is where our salmon circle begins. To harvest eggs and sperm, the fishermen get special permits for fishing salmon, and the fish that have been caught are kept in cages. The fish rearers arrive, put up a tent, and quickly start working. Eggs and sperm are taken from salmon as well as sea trout. To get the highest quality eggs and to keep a fish from struggling, it has to be anesthetized in a special solution. The sedated fish is taken from the solution and washed in clean water. The anesthetic must not come into contact with eggs and sperm because it would also anesthetize the sperm.
Kui ma ei saa saaba loputada, Mari tuleb välja.
Aita Jüril hoida. See on lõigatud rasva.
Lõigatud, jah.
Seda on Põllulas üles kasvatatud. Ilmselt siis 97-98 aastal asutatud siia samasse jõkke. Ja nüüd tuli siis siia jõkke, kus me teda asustasime, tuli tagasi kudema. Marja saamiseks kinni püütud, siin me siis kuivatame sellepärast, et marja hulka ei tohi veepisakesi langeda. See vähendab marja viljastumisvõimet. Oi,
The eggs of each fish are stripped into a separate tray. Eggs have to be protected from sunlight, wind, and cold. One fish usually produces 1 to 3 liters of eggs. Eggs account for about 1/5 of the weight of a female fish.
Pakkumine on 5000 teraliitris. Me mõõdame selle ära ka mitu teraliitris on.
Forellil on siis kuskil 7-8.
Brood fish are weighed, length is measured, and scales and tissue samples are taken to determine age and also for genetic research.
104 sentimeetrit. Näed, rasvavõime ei ole. Rasvavõimest on piisikene jätkukene jäänud. Me ju märgistame kõik kalad. 98. aastal meil oli ligi 200 000 kala kasvatatud ja asustatud ja igal kalal me lõikasime rasvavõime ära. Ja nüüd need kalad hakkavad tagasi tulema. Nüüd võtame koeproovi. Vaatame veel seda.
Koeproovid lähevad Tartusse kalade geneetikutele uuringuks, et teevad DNA analüüsi, et saada teada, kuidas ta geneetiliselt on.
Tuli Soomest ka.
In cooperation with the scientists of other countries, Estonian fish researchers permanently monitor the genetic makeup of populations. Genetic research is required to determine if salmon and sea trout have been accidentally hybridized, as sometimes they look identical. Releasing of hybrids is not allowed. The scales provide information about the age of a fish and if it has come to spawn during previous years.
1 kilo.
5. Pakin ta siis nüüd veekindlalt, et kui ma nüüd välja lähen, et ta vett ei saaks. Nii iseloomulikult.
Salmon, like many other fish, wear wedding garments during the spawning period. In the sea, they are silvery. Before spawning, their coloration turns darker, the skin grows thicker, and the end of the lower jaw of the male swells, forming a hook-like growth that points up.
No sellel on jah tüüpiline konks lõuas.
Isase pulmarüü seisnebki selles tugevalt arenenud lõuakonksus. Selle marli paneme selleks, et siit ei tilguks.
Saba pealt ei tuleks vett.
Vett ei tohi niisaks saada mitte üks teeb. See aktiviseerib niisa ja hiljem siis näed pistul üle.
Jaa.
Niisk on veel tundlikum hapnikupuuduse suhtes kui mari. Et siia ma nüüd lisan minigripikott ja hapnikut. Nii. Saab termogaas, siin on nüüd üks jää peale, et ta tahab jäädes olla.
Ops. Eksad hoida?
5,8.
5,8.
The Põllula Fish Rearing Center cooperates with Narva and Karepa fishermen who fish for salmon every autumn in order to harvest eggs. Now salmon catches have increased thanks to the fish reared at Põllula and released into the rivers. The International Baltic Sea Fishery Commission has introduced a salmon action plan which regulates the restocking, protection and monitoring of salmon resources. The migrations of sea trout are shorter, and so more of them are present for the local fishermen to catch. It is in the interests of the fishermen that this species also continues to reproduce.
Lõhel on üldiselt vähem täppe ja need täpid on X-kujulised, nagu siin on ka mõned X-kujulised täpid sellel meriforellil. Aga lõhel on ikka valdavalt ainult X-kujulised täpid ja rohkem üleval pool seljajoont või seda küljejoont, et selja pool on lõhel ja on vähem täppe ja selliseid suuri ümmargusi täppe ei ole. Aga meriforellil on nüüd täppe palju rohkem ja siis osa nendest on sellised ümmargused, nagu sellel kalal tüüpiliselt praegu näha on. Ta üleni tulevad täppidel read ülevalt alla kuni kõhuni välja.
When restocking fish populations, preserving natural diversity is important. Not just various species, but also populations with their genetic differences have to be protected. Research shows salmon populations of the Gulf of Bothnia, the Finnish Gulf, and the southern parts of the Baltic Sea are genetically different. To preserve genetic diversity, it is vital that weak natural populations be strengthened only on the basis of eggs and sperm gathered in specific areas. In cooperation with scientists, state-owned fish hatcheries can meet these needs in the best way.
Nüüd me oleme marjale niiska peale. Seda nimetatakse kuivmeetodiks, et kuivalt paneme algul peale, natuke segame, kirjutame üles, millise emakala marjale me nüüd selle niisa ja millise isase niisa me panime. Niisad on kontrollitud mikroskoobiga, et oleks siis spermatosoidid liikuvad. Nüüd segame natuke. Ja siis paneme veidikese vett ja segame uuesti. Ja segame uuesti. Nüüd hakkab siin kausisse viljastumisprotsess, mis kestab võib-olla paarkümmend sekundit ainult. Ja nüüd selleks, et olla päris kindel, et see viljastus siin hästi läks, siis ma panen nüüd natukene seda teise isase niiska ka peale. Kui see esimene oli hea niisk, siis ta jõudis juba selle aja peale viljastada ja siis me saime nagu paaride kaupa need riistad. Ja nüüd vaatame, mõne minuti ja siis hakkame loputama.
Eggs are rinsed in water to get rid of sperm residue and to reduce the stickiness of eggs. In nature, the stickiness is necessary so that water won't carry eggs away from the spawning bed. In the hatchery, if eggs were to stick to the incubation racks, that would make it difficult to care for them.
Siit on kohe näha, et me kleepuv, nad üks marjatera ei tule isegi kallutades sealt põhjapidi edasi. Näed, ma võin kallatada peaaegu tühjaks. Kleebib. Niisugune raske, näed. Aga pärast siis ta on juba niisugune kerge, et ta lendleb selles veejoas.
Newly taken eggs can be kept at a temperature of 0 degrees Celsius for 1 to 2 days, and the sperm for a week or even longer. After fertilization, eggs are sensitive for a few hours to being moved. The eggs are left in a dark place under moving water to grow. Their size increases by about 1/4 at this stage. After the sensitive stage, the fertilized eggs are disinfected for 10 minutes with a preparation that contains iodine to kill possible pathogens on the egg shells. There are certain viruses and one species of bacteria that can penetrate the egg, and disinfecting does not destroy them. It is safer to put the wild salmon eggs in a special quarantine hatchery, as is done in some other countries. After being disinfected, the eggs are measured and put on racks in a hatchery, keeping the eggs taken from each female separate, if possible. Dead eggs, which turn white, are removed with tweezers.
No, siin ütleme, palju teda on? 600 milliliitrit. Nüüd kallan ta ettevaatlikult siia. Siis natukene jätad siia kohal.
Since eggs are sensitive to light, they are kept in the dark under a stream of water. The fish hatchery uses water that comes from the nearby Lavi spring. The water contains little oxygen and the temperature is 6 degrees all year round. In winter, the water is warmer than the ambient temperature, and during summer it is colder than in the rivers. That is why the fry hatch during the winter period, not in spring, like they would under natural conditions. During summer, the spring water is warmed and it becomes rich in oxygen. The spring water is clean and the risk of diseases is minimal. In order to attain the level of 8 degrees temperature in late winter that is necessary for the fry to start feeding, a heat pump is switched on for a couple of months at the hatchery. The water is cleaned with a cylinder filter. A salmon egg develops in a hatching box for an average of 440 degree days. The number of so-called degree days is the sum of average temperatures of the days from fertilization to hatching. The hatching process is hard on small fish, and not all of them survive. Successful hatching is a sign of good environmental conditions for the development of eggs and embryos. Some come out of the eggshell head first, while others emerge tail first. Usually, hatching tail first is easier, but there are also dangers. The husk may stick to the head and hinder the young fish from getting oxygen. After hatching, the alevin lie on their sides in the bottom of the box. They can't even move because the yolk sac provided to them by nature is large in comparison to their bodies. The yolk sac is complete with blood vessels, and it contains all nutrients necessary for initial development.
Siin on nädalavanused lõhevastsed ja siin on näha, et tal on see rebukott hästi suur. Ta ei ole veel pigmenteerunud, hästi vähe on siin selja peal näha neid pigmendirakke. Siin on näha veresooned, mis ümbritsevad seda rebukotti, sealt ta võtab siis toitainet ja siin on rasvatilk, mis selle rebukotis on talle ka toiduks. selja peal on näha, et pigmendirakud on juba arenenud, et pigmenteerunud on juba niisugune tume selg. Südames pea pool on lõpus kaaned näha, kui nüüd lõpus piib.
At first, the larvae don't react to light, but despite this, they need to be kept in the dark. 1 week-old fish start to react to light and try to keep away from it. Length of dependency on the yolk sac depends on water temperature. At Pulula, this period lasts about 6 weeks. Before switching to food in the external environment, there's a period of mixed feeding. They still get something from their yolk sacs, but also ingest food from their surroundings. When the yolk sac has been diminished to less than a quarter of its original size, the time is right to start feeding. A reproductive disorder of salmon known as the M74 syndrome poses a danger now. It may appear in some descendants of some females, and that is why it is important to keep the eggs and larvae of every female separate until they start feeding.
Siin me näeme nüüd lõhe paljunemishäirest M74 vaevatud vasseid. Siin on näha, et kala ei suuda olla õiges asendis, on külje peal, teeb selliseid üksikuid närvilisi sööstusid, aga langeb uuesti tagasi. Ja rebukotis on näha, et veresoonestik on hakanud taandarenema. See häire ise tuleneb tõenäoliselt merekeskkonna muutusest ja seostatakse ka toitumistingimuste muutusega meres. Emaskalad ei söö nii mitmekesist toitu, nagu neile organismile tarvis oleks. Söövad rohkem ainult kala, see on põhiliselt räime ja räimelihastes sisalduv tiamiini ehk B1 vitamiini lõhustav aine tiaminaas siis lõhustab nende organismis ka tiamiini ja seetõttu siis nende emaskalade marjas koorunud vassetel tekib selline haiguspilt. Ja kui me nüüd neid ei vannitaks tiamiini lõhuses, siis nad sureksid 10 päeva jooksul kõik ära.
In Pulula, the feeding of the alevin usually begins in March. In nature, they start to feed much later, when the water temperature has risen to 8 degrees. Feeding shouldn't be started too early, as small food particles may choke smaller fish still lying in the bottom of the tank. It can take from a few days to up to a week for the larvae to begin to feed. After the yolk sac is empty, the alevin have developed into a stage where they are called fry. Now they can already move and feed. When their bodies begin to be covered with scales, the fry have turned into fingerlings. When their bodies are fully covered with scales, the fingerlings have turned into juvenile fish covered with marks and spots called parr.
Seda nimetaks tehnikuks. Siin on näha need niinimetatud sõrmejäljed. Lõhel on täpselt selline, lõhel muid täppe eriti ei ole. No natukene siin selja pool on veel ka mingisugused laigukesed, aga need sõrmejäljed nimetatakse neid või kutsutakse niimoodi, et sõrmejälgedega. See on nüüd tehnik. See, kellel neid täppe enam ei ole, kes on õbestunud, see on nüüd laskuja ja tema laskubki kevadel merre. Kui ta mingil põhjusel jääb laskumata, siis tal natukene nagu taandub see õbestumine, aga kuigi ta jääb ikka enam-vähem õbedaseks kogu aeg, natuke taandub ja siis ta tahaks järgmisel kevadel merre minna. Merre ta tahab igal juhul minna.
Salmon are released at the age of 1 or 2 years, depending on their growth. Under the conditions of Pulula, 1-year-old salmon weigh 25 to 35 grams and are suitable for stocking. Smaller ones are sorted out and left in the tanks for 1 more year. It would be economically more lucrative to stock 2-year-old fish that will be ready for fishing more quickly. However, in our situation, the purpose of fish breeding is to restore the salmon populations that have disappeared, and in such cases, using 1-year-old fish attains better results. They stay in a given river for a longer period, get used to the smells, and pick up on the feeling of a home river. In order to be able to monitor the survival and migration of the released salmon, their adipose fins are cut off. When caught, this shows that the fish is from Pulula, as other countries of the Baltic region don't engage in fin clipping. At the time fins are clipped, the fish are anesthetized in a special solution to prevent unnecessary injury. There is also another method. Marking with individual tags gives more accurate information about the released fish. A plastic tag is attached beneath the dorsal fin with return instructions and the address of Pulula. The tag must be attached firmly. If it starts to move, the wound won't heal. This work takes time because the fish has to be anesthetized, measured, and weighed. All of the data of every fish are registered. Pulula has a good cooperative relationship with the taggers of the Finnish Game and Fisheries Research Institute, who help with tagging and with the compiling of databases. The tags are made in Finland.
Meillähän on kuitenkin, me eletään tässä saman lahden rannalla ja meillä on tällainen keskitetty kantojen ja eri kalalajien valtion viljelyssä oleva kalasto. Minun mielestäni myöskin Eestissä kannattaisi mennä siihen, että otettaisiin kaikki vielä villinä elävät lohikannat valtion, tai tällä hetkellä tämä on valtionlaitos, niin valtion kalaviljelyn piiriin. Eli kaikki lohikannat, joita vielä saadaan talteen, ja samoin myöskin meritaimenkannat. Ja tämä laitos on hyvin sopiva tällaiseen toimintaan. Täällä on lähdevesitys, tämä on joen alkulähteeltä saa vetensä, täällä on tautiongelmat erittäin pienet ja lämpötilat ovat sopivat, että varmasti kannattaisi siirtyä myöskin täällä sellaisen toimintaan.
The current capacity of the Pulula Fish Rearing Center makes it possible to rear and stock 100 to 150,000 one-year-old and 40,000 two-year-old fish per year. During the second half of April, the center begins releasing the fish into rivers in accordance with the recommendations of scientists. The fish are extracted from tanks, weighed, and put into transport containers. During February and March, these fish already underwent fin clipping because this work takes time and it can't be done during the release period. Individual tags are also attached 3 to 4 weeks before release to give the fish some time to recover from stress and for the wounds to heal. In every lot, about 500 to 1,000 fish have individual tags. From 1997 to 2001, Pulula has released more than 750,000 juvenile salmon to the old salmon rivers of northern Estonia. This year's first lot is on its way. Juvenile fish that hatched in winter will replace these fish in the tanks. The brood stock is also retained in pools. This is one way to duplicate the genetic material of natural populations. Thus, the loss of valuable genetic material can be avoided in the event that there were a serious change to the environment. If the natural population were to die out, it would be gone forever. In such a situation, brood stock can be used for re-establishing the population. During transport, oxygen is added to the containers and the percentage of oxygen in the water is measured.
Alguses vaatame tihedamini kuskil veerand tunni tagant peale väljasõitu. Hiljem see vaheaeg võib natukene suuremaks.
The window of opportunity for release is short, as the fish must be in the river for a certain period of time before descending to the sea. Migration takes place when the river water is at a certain temperature. Depending on the conditions of the given spring season, fish begin to be released during the second half of April, continuing until the middle of May. The transportation of fish must take place as quickly as possible. If the temperature of the river water differs from the temperature in a container by more than 1 degree, the temperatures are evened during a period of some 20 minutes by pumping river water into the containers. If fish are to be released in places where trucks can't get to the riverbanks, help is needed to get the fish to the water in buckets. This way, there is less danger that the fish might get hurt, and they are released into the water gently. In the old days, the fish were released the same way. Such a big crowd is not always available, but the fish must get out of the containers as quickly as possible. The fish get out more quickly through the pipe, but the stress they endure is more severe. In shallow water, it has to be taken into account that the stream of water can dash the fish against the bottom or the rocks. The best release sites are places where the fish can find shelter for resting to regain strength after a hard journey. These are rivers with recesses under their banks and vegetation that provides cover. After release, the fish, which are used to the safe conditions of a fish farm, must learn to survive in nature. The farm fish are bigger than wild smolts, and to an extent, this compensates for their lack of experience and skills. Salmon are travelers. The released 2-year-old fish and the biggest of the 1-year-olds that weighs some 25 to 35 grams will smolt and migrate to sea in a couple of weeks. The smaller ones that haven't developed the silver coloring yet will stay in the river for 1 more year to live their parr life. In the sea, salmon make long feeding migrations, feeding mostly on small herring and sprat. They grow quickly, and after the 3rd summer of their life in the sea, they come back to spawn in their home river or the river where they were released. Memory of smell helps in finding the home river, for the fish do remember the specific smells of their home river. After spawning, part of them perish, while others come back for a second time. Some come back to spawn as many as 4 to 5 times. The success of spawning depends on local conditions and how well people manage to protect the fish and their habitats. If for years fishermen hadn't even seen salmon, now there's a reason to go to sea. The first salmon come with the Baltic herring shoals. The main catches take place in August, when the water gets cooler and last until autumn. According to statistics for 1992 to 1997, catches of about 2.2 tons per year were made near the Estonian coasts in the Gulf of Finland. Since 1999, when the first Põllula fish began migrating home, the catches have increased quickly. During 2000, coastal fishing provided 20 tons of salmon. 95 fish of 100 have had their fins clipped, so they are from Põllula.
Varem mul niisugust lõhevõrke ei olnud suure silmaga. Lihtsalt ei midagi püüda.
Perhaps more important than the catches is the attitude of the fishermen towards the work of the fish breeders.
1907. aasta maikuus on märgistatud, 23. mai märgistatud väike lõhe. Number on ka kõik, Põllula number siin. Ja see on nüüd 70-grammine või mis need väiksed lasti sisse. Ja siis sügisel, et sama see partii oli juba 530 grammi kaalusid. Ja järgmine kevad oli kilo 50. Kui tuleb Eesti märgiga kala, siis kaalume ära, mõõdame pikkuse ja siis võtame selle märgi ja võtame natuke soomust, paneme ümbriku sisse ja anname kalandusspetsialisti kätte. Edasi läheb juba teadlaste kätte ja edasi.
Fish breeders and fishermen have one common aim, that salmon can breed once again without human help in the salmon rivers that, at an earlier point in time, were full of fish.